In today's video, I'm going to be talking about Brazil from a migration stance. This is for the OCR A-Level Geography Spec, where you need to know an EDC case study. I'm going to look at current patterns of immigration and emigration for Brazil and how that's changed over time in this video. So in terms of current patterns, the key idea that I want to focus on is net migration loss. In the Brazilian context, this essentially means that in recent times, more people have left Brazil than how have actually come into Brazil. And in terms of figures, we can see that between 2000 and 2009, there was a net migration loss of 1 million. That means 1 million more people left Brazil than migrated into Brazil. That slowed slightly between 2010 and 2014, and it slid to 190,000 more people leaving than coming in. But we can still see that the key idea here in terms of modern patterns is more people are leaving than coming in. In terms of trying to explain some of those patterns, but also look at some of the patterns happening in terms of immigration and emigration, we can say that there has been increased migration between Brazil and neighbouring countries. Brazil is part of Mercosur, which is a trade bloc, which Argentina and Uruguay and other countries are part of. We're also seeing the movement between Brazil and some of the Andean states, so Chile, Peru, Bolivia. All of these are really good examples of south-to-south migration, which has obviously increased in recent years, and we can see that because they are neighbouring countries where it's much easier to move between those countries than to move into the global north. We see a really clear pattern in Brazil in terms of an increased emigration of highly skilled workers, so doctors, architects, teachers. They are moving to opportunities in the USA and Europe and Japan, but at the same time we used to see quite a lot of low skilled economic migrants moving to the USA, and that has severely decreased in recent years. We see lots of people, labour migrants, economic labour migrants coming to Brazil to work on construction projects, and there were two kind of key construction projects that were drawing in a lot of people: the Brazil World Cup in 2014 and also the Summer Olympics in Rio in 2016. We see an increased amount of people coming from Haiti in the Caribbean. This is largely due to the fact there was a 2010 earthquake and then followed very, very quickly by a hurricane in 2012. So we see people moving from the Caribbean to Brazil, which has therefore created an interdependent link between the countries. The other kind of a couple of key areas I need to focus on, we see increased migrant from Africa into Brazil. They often come via transit countries like Ecuador and Chile. What that actually means is they land in a country where the migration policies are quite open and then often get smuggled across the border. Some of those people end up staying in Brazil, and the African community in Brazil is continuing to grow, but some of those people then use Brazil as a transit country to move onwards north to opportunities in the USA. Last thing to focus on is in internal migration, so people moving from the poor northeast, where there is increased environmental problems like drought, to economic opportunities in the big cities of the southeast like Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. So those was a quick run through of the main current patterns of immigration and emigration. Now we're going to look at changes that have happened over time. So we talk about Brazil having a net migration loss at the moment, but that hasn't always been the case. In fact, in the 19th and 20th century, it was a net recipient of migrants. That essentially means more people are coming into the country than are leaving. And this was because, as we see on this map on the left here, Europeans were looking for economic opportunities, and they found that they were attracted to Brazil because they could get involved in the agricultural sector, setting up and running coffee cultivation plants, and the people from Europe and Japan came to Brazil for those opportunities. Some of them later on ended up working in the growing industry in Brazil. In terms of the actual countries they came from, so obviously we mentioned Japan, but Portugal, Italy and Germany were the really key countries where lots of those migrants came to Brazil. Since the 2000s, obviously, we've seen patterns change. Emigration has obviously increased, and in terms of figures, that means back in 2000, there was about 0.98 million people living abroad that are Brazilian, and that has increased to 1.77 million. These are obviously estimations, but we can see that there's a clear pattern. At the same time, immigration has decreased, so estimated that there are 80,000 fewer immigrants living in Brazil than there were in 2000. We might even look into the future and say that these patterns might also change again. President Bolsonaro, he's a far-right leader, and therefore he's a very big fan of Donald Trump. He's expected to kind of have pretty strict views on immigration, which might make that immigration decrease even more, and also might actually put Brazilians off from living in the country and actually increase immigration, people moving out to Portugal and other places because they feel like they have more political freedoms there. Obviously, it depends on whether he stays in power, but that's something we can predict and talk about in terms of AO2 for the future. Where are kind of people that are leaving Brazil ending up? So there's some clear patterns here. We can see right at the top that most people are still ending up in the USA, where there's economic opportunities, but also lots of people are saying and ending up in Japan, Portugal and Italy. Economic opportunities is a big part of it, but also these are places that they've got historic links with from the 19th century, and therefore there are established diasporas there, which means it's easier for people to integrate. On the opposite way, where are people that are coming to Brazil actually coming from? And we see, again, that link with the countries that are neighbouring, Paraguay and Bolivia, a part of Mercosur, but also the fact is that those economies are slightly worse than Brazil, and so people come for economic opportunities, which is much easier in that south-to-south migration. We also see on our list here that, again, same historic cultural links and diasporas, so the immigration patterns work both ways. People from Brazil go to Japan, but also people from Japan end up coming to Brazil.